Well, I was going to start with Ed Schrock, but everybody else got to him first. I wrote to Ed and I said, Ed, don't die. I want to see you at the reunion. And Cindy wrote back, of course. We're really glad to see you, Ed. Our greetings from Marty Prudhomme, our dear, dear friend from Louisiana, class of 1964, St. Bernard Parish High School. And she said to say hi to all of you. She just was here with us just this past week. You know, I love to get together with my radio buddies. They all give me a short wave. Oh, yeah. You couldn't see that one coming. Just watch out when they give those microwaves. Yeah. I wanted to start off tonight with the Captain Yobi's radio jingle. Can any of you remember it? You remember that? I remember it because I worked there at KDO. I played that thing day after day, because if you're not going to sing it, I am, okay? If anybody remember it at all? Okay. Well, it's a little late to say this, but put food in your tummy tum 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 tummy tum 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 tummy tum tum. If you haven't any teeth up above or beneath, you can gum it with your gummy gum gums. You can gum it with your gummy gum gums. Eat food. That's what it was. Boy, they had the craziest things on radio, didn't they? You know, I've spent way over half of my life cherishing the double meaning. They call it pun. I don't know where they got that name. But at one point in my life, at least, I had considered writing a book and calling it Pure Punography. I was not an athlete. I actually did, and I won't go through the details of this, but I actually did run with a cross-country team, made varsity, and quit. I was a trombonist. I guess I was suffering from thrombosis. So, whatever. Oh, did you notice I had a Tommy Hilfiger shirt on tonight? It buttons itself. Look at that. It just... I got this thing and I fiddled with the buttons and I said, I can't get this thing buttoned. Oh, it is buttoned. Yeah, and it made me think of how this whole thing was invented in the first place. All these guys getting together and trying to design these pretty shirts and everything, and they got so frustrated they finally gave up and said, just give it to Tommy, he'll figure it out. Oh, there you go. See, that's the greatest reward a punster can get is the groan. Say, how many did have Rosemary Leedon for a teacher? Okay, well, not an awful lot of us. I was thinking about her one day and I thought, oh my goodness, if she was Miss Leedon, what? What was that? Come on, Jay, share it with us. What?
We're trying to figure out where the bathroom is.
Oh, the bathroom. Okay, all right. Okay, everybody, let's take a break. Well, so if she was misleading, were we misled? I'm just saying, you know, well, you know, I just love to study maps. I'm serious. I absolutely love maps. And Google Earth is my friend. And I have an old atlas that my dad used. It's from the year I was born, 1946, all these roads that don't exist anymore. I just love these things. And Forest Service maps, trail maps, road maps. I think I ought to be called a roads scholar. Yeah. I've got my notes here, so really I am trying to stay organized. You know, I am a preacher, you know, so I could, never mind, I could really, but I won't. Go long, that's what I was going to say. Did you hear about the guys that were members of the Gentlemen's Club? And when I think of this, I think of the Club Union in San Jose, Costa Rica. It's one of those clubs with the guys, as they say in Spanish, men of quality. which really means quality, you know. And so they were having a meeting one day, and one of the guys had a guest with him who had never been to this club, and they sat down and they had a wonderful meal, kind of like we did, and they were sitting having a good time. Pretty soon a fellow gets up and he says, "Number 22," and the crowd just roared in laughter. And that died down. Another stands up and he says, "Number 13," and they just roar with laughter. And this goes on, and finally this guy turns to his friend. He says, "What are they doing?" He says, "Oh, these are the jokes. We've known these things for so many years that we don't tell them anymore. We just put numbers on them and just say them like that, you know." And so this guy thought, hey, this is a good idea. So pretty soon he stands up and he says, "Number 2. And he bombs, you know, and nobody laughs, you know, maybe a chuckle or two. He's so humiliated, he sits down. And so the meeting gets over, and they're walking outside, and he says, "Hey," he says, "tell me, wasn't number 2 a good joke?" He says, "Oh yeah, number 2, that was a good one." He says, "How come they didn't laugh?" He says, "Oh, no, don't worry." He says, "Some guys can tell them and some guys can't." My wife and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary last December. And, you know, increasingly as the years go by, you know, we guys, we're a little bit remiss about the words, "I love you," and all this juicy stuff and everything. So my wife will once in a while say, "Honey, do you love me?" And I'll say, finally I got to be where I'd say, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. 1, 2, and then she bops me. I still work full-time. I got to be at work at 11 o'clock in the morning, so I'm out of here early. And I work in a home improvement store that would just put Lowe's and Home Depot to shame. We've got such wonderful customer service, and we guys get educated. I work in plumbing and electric, and I've been there for over 11 years, and so everybody comes to me and they say, "Hey, Greg, can I pick your brain?" I said, "Yeah, everybody else does, and look what happened to me." And anyway, I'm in the plumbing electric department. Right next to us is bath, kitchen, and decor. So they sell the bathtubs and the vanities and the sinks and the showers and all this stuff. It would be, you know, I haven't ever really done this, but I got to catch myself here because it wouldn't be too hard to just say, "Hey, bath, kitchen, decor, I have a man over here who needs a shower." You know. Boy, I'll tell you, I do get some that haven't had water for a few days, and it really, yeah, right. Forrest Gump. How many of you love Forrest Gump? Well, Forrest Gump died. He was going to heaven. St. Peter met him there. "Hi, Forrest," you know, he says, "But, Forrest, I got to tell you, we've had quite a run lately. A lot of people coming up. We've had to thin some out, so I'm going to give you a test." I'm sure you've all heard about the test to get into heaven. But Forrest Gump, you know, this is pretty special. So St. Peter says to him, "Well, Forrest, first question is, which days of the week start with T?" And so Forrest Gump thinks a moment. He says, "Today and tomorrow." "Well, you got me on that one. You hit me broadside. I wasn't expecting that one." "Okay, well, I'll give that to you." So the second question, "How many seconds in a year?" Thought for a moment, and he says, 12. 12 seconds in a year? Where do you get that? He says, January 2nd, February 2nd. You know. Well, so the last question, he says, "Okay, Forrest, I got to give it to you, but here's the last one. This is a good one. What is God's first name?" "Oh," he says, "that's simple. It's Andy." "Forrest, where in the world you come up with this?" He says, "Andy walks with me, Andy talks with me." "Okay, Forrest, you got it. Go, boy." So when we were our first time in Norway, 1986, how many Norwegians do we have? I don't think we have. Oh my goodness, look at that. I knew there were some. Oh, cool. Have been to Norway?
No.
Oh, you got to go to Norway. But anyway, we got to Norway, and we met a fellow named Sigvard Wallenberg from Sweden, who was the Bob Hope of Scandinavia. I'm serious. This guy was Scandinavia's Bob Hope, and he could sing, beautiful big baritone voice, kind of like Bob Hauge, and play the piano. He played the piano for Louis Armstrong when Louis traveled in Europe, and he'd been a humorist as well. He was funny, and then later he became an evangelist. But anyway, we were in this meeting. We had come all the way from, we came from Costa Rica to Guatemala to Miami and then over to Oslo, and rode into the mountains all dressed up all the way, ready for this meeting. We land, we drive up almost to the Continental Divide and into this meeting hall, and we're in there, and the long and the short of it is that by the time this fellow got up to speak, our hostess, who was a missionary from Guatemala, turned to us and said, we're going to go down to our hotel room because there's not going to be any English translation. So Sigvard gets up to speak, and we're walking down the stairs of this platform, and all of a sudden the people just roared, practically rolling off their chairs in laughter. So I said, hey, tell me some of your secrets. He said, well, there's always been this rivalry between Sweden and Norway, and at some point in history it wasn't all that friendly either, but it is today, so there's no war going on in that way. So he says, for example, he says, oh, did you know that they had to close the Oslo library? He said, somebody stole the book. Oh, and they had a power outage the other day in Oslo, and 20 Norwegians were stranded for 2 hours on an escalator. You don't have to laugh, really. This stuff is not very funny. A Swedish lady, a young Swedish lady married an Arab guy, and they named their son Yasher Yabetcha. And of course, being a preacher, I would have to tell you a few church bloopers and some church jokes, you know. You remember the story of Lot when he had to leave Sodom and Gomorrah because they're going to throw sulfur and fire down on that thing. And so anyway, the teacher was saying, well, Lot's wife looked back and she turned into a pillar of salt. And little Johnny speaks up and he says, that's nothing. My mama was driving down the street the other day and she looked back and turned into a telephone pole. I love the church bloopers. You can look these up on the web, and some of these are a little racy. I didn't even bring some of those, so I'll tell some of the milder ones, such as, for those of you who are parents and don't know it, there's a nursery downstairs. The low self-esteem group will meet Tuesday from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Please use the back door. But the Weight Watchers will be meeting at the First Presbyterian Church at 7 p.m. Please use the large double doors. There's a sign in front of the church over here that says Jesus Saves. Across the street at Safeway, it says Safeway saves you more. And finally, this is the crowning glory. Missionary from Africa, speaking at Calvary Memorial Church in Racine. Her name, Bertha Belch. The announcement, come out and hear Bertha Belch all the way from Africa. And of course, we couldn't leave our blonde friends out. And some of you probably a little more blonde than you used to be. So you talk about travel. I did have the privilege of being on a ship. This is 25 years back, down in Gulfport, Mississippi. And I got to see the beaches down there. They're very flat. How many of you know the Gulf Coast beaches? You've seen those. They're very flat. You can walk a quarter mile out and be about this deep in water. So these two blondes are on this beach. It's a nice summer night, the full moon, balmy sea breezes, and of course the surf doesn't, really come up on those unless they got a hurricane. And so they're looking at the moon, and one of them says, I wonder which is closer, the moon or Florida? And the other one looks at her and says, hello, can you see Florida? And then there's the blondes that came down to the river, and she saw another blonde come down across the river from her, and the girl over there says, hey sis, how do I get to the other side? And she says, hello, you are on the other side. Oh, then there were the blondes who visited NASA down in Houston, and they had a real plan up their sleeves. They're talking to the engineers and the controllers and so forth, and they confessed that they were trying to rig up a voyage to the sun. And of course, right away, the guys were saying, "Oh, honey, you can't do that. You'll burn up." And she says, "Silly boys, we're going at night." Well, finally, there was the girl, that blonde girl that worked at the Jaguar agency. She was a secretary and made pretty good money. And she saved up and bought herself a brand new Jaguar. And so she took it home and she would drive it to work, kept it clean, all that. And about a week went by and she told her boss, she says, "Well, I really like the car, but I can't, there's sometimes it just won't work." Oh my goodness, they sent a technician out there. He got the keys, took the car out, ran it fast, ran it slow, ran it around the corners, put the scanner on it. Everything was immaculate. There wasn't a thing wrong with it. So he brought it back, handed her the keys and says, "Ma'am, this car is immaculate. It's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it." She says, "Well, sometimes I just can't get it to go." And he says, "Well, are you sure that you're in the right gear?" She says, "Well, I'm not stupid." That's part of the joke. I'm not. Anyway, she says, "I'm not stupid. In the daytime, I shift into D, and at night, I shift into N." Oh, well. There you go. How many of you remember the Pope Mobile? Remember the Pope Mobile for the Pope? Well, we got to see it in Costa Rica. I mean, I was there when it came through. They're right there on 2nd Avenue, right down in front of the cathedral. And this is a story, by the way, I heard from a bus driver down there last December. I didn't know about this. But it seems like there was one of the local guys, he was so excited. He wanted to see the Pope, and he drove his car down there, and he parked it, and he took his Costa Rican flag with him. He was going to be so proud, and he was walking away, and he looked back, and there were the police there with a wrecker, a tow truck, loading up his car to tow off. He went back and says, "You can't take my car." He says, "Sir, you're parked in a no parking zone. We're going to take the car. You're going to have to come down and collect it." Oh, he got so mad. He went right over there by the cathedral, and they got these tall trees down there, and he climbed one of those trees and was sitting there in protest with his flag up there. And then the Pope Mobile came down. Here it goes right by, and the Pope is waving and so forth. And all of a sudden, the thing was, just as it passed him, he came down that tree so fast. He was all wide-eyed, and his buddy said, "Jose, what happened? What happened?" He says, "Man," he says, "the Pope went by, and he looked at me, and he says, 'Either come down from that tree, or we're cutting it down.'" There you go. Oh, there was a young man, a young farmer, bought a horse from a guy. And it was a wonderful horse, docile, powerful. I mean, he worked well. He was just the nicest horse, except that the birds kept building nests in his mane. And he tried clipping, he tried poison, he tried everything. He couldn't get the birds to stop building nests in that horse's mane. What a problem that was. So finally he goes back to the farmer and he says, "What do I do about this?" He said, "Son, no problem." He said, "Just rub yeast into it." Yeast? What's up with that? So he goes back and he rubs the yeast into the mane, and a week went by, and 2 weeks, no birds. Now he's got to find out. So he goes back to the farmer. He says, "Well, sir," he said, "that really worked. So what's the secret?" He said, "Very simple. Yeast is yeast, and nest is nest, and never the mane shall tweet." Am I going over time? Oh, man. Well, okay. Okay, all right. So we've got to stop by having a sort of a celebration of old age. I thought we'd do a little old age here. Don't fall asleep reading old magazines, because you might wake up with back issues. Two old Englishmen, I'll go right through these. Two old Englishmen in a sports car open, and they're going down, these old guys, going, says, one guy says, "Oh, I do believe this is Wembley." And he says, "No, it's Thursday." Oh, he says, "So am I. Let's stop and have a snort." I've got to tell you this one. A policeman pulls over a car with 4 elderly ladies in it for going 25 miles an hour on the freeway. And he notices as he comes up to the car that the three passengers are ashen-faced, wide-eyed, and very quiet. And the lady rolls down, the driver rolls down her window and says, well, after he inspected her license and so forth, he said, well, officer, why did you pull me over? I was only going 25 miles an hour. And he said, yeah, you were, ma'am, but this is a freeway at 65 miles an hour is the speed limit here. Your relative speed is 40 miles an hour. Somebody could smack you from behind. That's dangerous. And she said, well, I was only going by the sign. And he looked up and he chuckled. He says, ma'am, that's the number of the highway. This is Interstate 25. And she said, oh, well, that would explain something. We just turned off of Route 157. So I'm going to quit. I'm going to sing you some songs. I thought you'd enjoy some songs. And I've just run real short excerpts from these songs, just changed the words a little bit. So starting with Paul Anka from 1959. Think of this one. Take the soap from its holder. Wash my back for me, baby. I can't do it anymore. Hank Lachlan, 1960, please help me, I've fallen, and I can't get up. Okay? The Beach Boys, 1964, get around, I used to get around. And finally, Willie Nelson, 1980, I'm on the bed again, and I better take my med again, so I don't feel half dead again, and have to miss the 55th reunion of the class of 1964. God bless you. Thank you very much. Have a good night.